Sometimes the dragon just needs to get witnessed, held, contained, mirrored. Because as that happens, the person starts becoming more and more conscious of the dragon. And anytime they're more conscious of something, then their ego's less and less identified with it. And so it starts to create space. It starts to undo the split. Because the split is, this part's important. The split isn't the natural state. It's not the true state. It requires effort and energy to maintain it, right? It's like, gravity or something, that there's this tensional pressure that is trying to bring the split together at all times. So when you start to become conscious as the dragon and give a little space, it's like, oh shit, here comes the child.
Yeah.
It just starts to show up. And then that's this thing in our psyche where, it can, there's that weird thing where we can think we want to be seen and heard and validated. And so if I'm triggered and angry and yelling at you, and then you really hold space and really hear and feel that I'm angry, and you really get it, and you really relate to me in a way where I can tell he really understands that I'm angry and why, and he's holding space for it, and he's validating it. And it's like, and as that starts to happen, often it's like, oh shit, it's too, you're doing it like too well, because now
I'm not
it starts,
just angry.
Yeah, right. It starts to create this space, and immediately the person starts to become aware of the flip side of that. Mm. And often people will literally try to get out of that dynamic that was happening.
Yeah.
That was actually in their favor, in order to reestablish, no, I'm angry and you're not hearing me.
Funny.
Because my pattern is more to not be heard,
right,
and then to be pissed about it. Quit fucking hearing me over there. Or I'm going to go talk to someone who doesn't hear me so that I can stay in my comfortable pattern. And it's the same, obviously, if you're working with a child, that if you hold a conscious space and that person actually starts feeling felt, the other side starts showing up. Then you start running into these phases. It's like, what happens? Well, initially confusion, right? The person starts to feel a little confused. They start to feel a little less convicted in their stance.
Yeah. That
was this dualistic stance. The situation starts to feel more complex. This different experience starts showing up that will often feel taboo. The taboo thing is really interesting. And again, I think Freud's stuff around that was really important. Not taboo, not just meaning, thoughts and feelings that your society says you shouldn't have. But I mean a deep experience in the psyche that feels disgusting. It feels wrong. That experience that we have if you see horror, that just your mind doesn't quite know how to.
Just want to physically run away.
Yeah. The kind of thing that makes you want to throw up, makes you want to. It's like that kind of experience starts to show up in our psyche with trauma. And so it can be a real barrier. You get there and then a person just doesn't want anything to do with it, even though that's going in the right direction. But it feels specifically like going in the wrong direction. And of course, a person will then again be really motivated to try to go back into some kind of intellectual defense and start explaining their way out of that.
That's a cool framing of the word taboo, because it's so personal.
Yeah, right.
You could stumble upon that, and for you it may be like, why in the world is this taboo? But there's that physical reaction you're talking about can be to just a part of the self that you just feel like it can't be you. That's pretty tough. And then when you run into that and that kind of intellectualizing a defense around it, you run into that with people, or it's just like you're encountering them, just relationally, and they just take flight.
Yeah. And that idea of intrapsychic versus interpersonal, like you're saying, it's a concept that isn't often thought of, to have this intrapsychic taboo,
Right.
which is different than the people around you telling you that you're doing something you're not allowed to.
Right.
But to your own superego, your own moral code, or whatever, to encounter something in yourself that you view as taboo,
Yeah.
is kind of the root of human shame and
Right. Keeps those things entrenched. The other thing I just wanted to come back to, because this is like such a physical felt experience, what you're talking about, as far as like that, maintaining that divide between dragon and child, that like that is a physical tension, not just like a tension in the psyche, or a tension in the awareness, or a tension in, we were actively investing energy in that division.
yeah.
And that their natural state is for them to come together. And like, to me, I think I've experienced that as, I mean, there's a frenzy around that keeping that divided, it felt relatable, that the mental psychic energy that we use for that is affecting everything else.
Right.
We've talked a little bit about cathexis, but the idea that it animates everything, right? That you have to have libidinal energy invested to do it at all. You know, like, so if you're going to be cathected to that dragon, it's because you got to be cathected to something.
Right.
So what does cathexis look like? Are you then cathected in the dialectic? What does it look like? Because cathexis, like, at least as I've understood it when you've talked about it before, has to happen just to, like, you have to be cathected to something to get out of bed in the morning, right? So if you're cathected in one thing over the other, that's the tension. That's you're paying a heavier price for that energy you're investing, right? So if you begin to allow for both to exist at the same time, what are you then cathected to?
Yeah, good question. It's that thing where the duality shifts, and it's simultaneously a negation that happens, like a ground state negation, that creates a presence. It creates this third thing, which is actually, let me just talk about dialectic for a minute, and then I'll apply it to it. Again, this idea of a dialectic, a lot of people think Hegel, they think thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. But synthesis is different than when you actually have a dialectic and you have this shift that happens that is more alchemical. It's more miraculous, right? It breaks the rules of classical physics. And so you arrive at this quote unquote other thing. But the idea is that actually the one thing you arrive at was the true thing before it was split. And the one thing is this, it's more of a quantum state. It's this non-dual type of thing, this conscious thing, this essence thing, that isn't subject to these same laws of you got to cathect to something and all that, right? It shifts to where there's this freedom, there's this spaciousness, there's multidimensionality, and the tension and release experience is there all at once. Mm. And it's available now to be focused here or there, or, you know, it's like with electricity, with an electrical current, right? It's different than plumbing, right? Where with plumbing, for example, you can have water running through the pipe, right? You get a backup of pressure on the one end. But that's different than an electrical circuit, right? You don't just have this backup of electrons sitting there, and then you open the gate, and then the electrons rush through the pipe to the other side. It's this, the physics are different as I understand it. And you get a circuit that happens between the two. It's so hard to explain it, because the general idea is there's literally a death that has to happen in the psyche, and then this rebirth. So it goes right all the way back to that Trinity idea, and that you have a certain thing going on if you have a duality. When you bring the duality together, there's a certain loss, there's a certain death, there's a certain destruction of what was, seemingly. But then you have this realization, or you have this awakening, or you have this rebirth of this third thing that was actually the first thing. And it doesn't make any sense. So, I'm sitting here falling into that same old trap of trying to rationalize something that's just not rational at all. I mean, obviously, if you use light, it's like the light bulb is sitting there lit up, but you go and you pull the cord out of the wall and the light goes away, right? And it's like, wait, what does the light have to do with, the cord being plugged into the wall, right? And it's like, well, there's this thing that happens, this circuit gets hooked up, and boom, you get light. And it's like that. It's like we're looking at the dragon and the child are like the plug and the outlet. And if you're trying to find light in the plug or in the outlet, good luck. That's very different than essence, right? If light is essence, if light is consciousness, when you unplug these two things in the psyche, the light goes out. But then we're left just looking at the two things, and we're going, well, is there light in the child? Well, is there light in the dragon? And the answer is no. Just like there's no light in the plug and there's no light in the outlet. That's not how it works. Light is this other thing. And
so are we cathecting in search of light?
I think you could say that as far as in our minds, maybe, but I think the actual
unconsciously, I
think the unconscious drive, if you will, or urge or desire is more just on the ego level. It's more just this movement of these fundamental laws of. It's that thing where, like in physics, when you start distilling down the laws of physics, right? It's like at a certain point they came down to 4 forces, right? But then they go deeper and there's 3 forces. They go deeper and there's 2 forces. And it depends on what you're talking about. If you go all the way,
right.
If you go all the way down, there's just one thing, right? And there's just one force. There's just one unity. And generally speaking, in the spiritual terminology, that one force is love. But when you separate it out, you start getting all these other things, other structures, other experiences. In the same way that you have light is white, right? It's this full spectrum thing, but you can refract it out and get these other colors. But they're a diminishment of what the original thing was.
Yeah.
Because light itself is not red, it's not yellow, and it's not green. And so I'd say that these unconscious, what we're calling libidinal energies, are these certain forces in the psyche that are unconscious, that and there's just this physics to it. It's like there's attraction that happens, right? These chemical attractions that are just part of the physical energetic world.
Yeah.
That our psyches are subject to, our ego mind is subject to. And that gets back to Freud's thing, that I've mentioned before, that Freud and Fairbairn, and the Freud's structural model versus Fairbairn's relational model, and Freud saying there was intrapsychic drives. Freud's thing was all about we're constantly trying to get tensional release.
Yeah. Okay.
Like that's just the constant urge. Sexual hunger. And Fairbairn was saying, no, it's actually the fundamental drive is to relate. It's not intrapsychic, it's interpersonal. And that's again where we get back to this whole relational school of how much is a person's issues intrapsychic versus how much is it interpersonal.
Yeah.
And again, that thing where in general it's like Freud says it's all intrapsychic and Fairbairn says it's all interpersonal. And I don't know if it's just that the literature seems to, our interpretation of the literature is that way, or if those guys really thought that.
Right.
Because it seems obvious to me it's a combination. Like why can't it be a combination?
You got to have somebody define one side really intensely.
Yeah. It's like we can't have the dialectic there.
Yeah.
But so these fundamental forces, the quote unquote unconscious motivation, the idea that that's there.
Yeah.
And then our minds are just coming up with what do we think is going to satisfy that?
It felt like we were really close with the lamp and the outlet. It felt like you were trying to like show me something, and I was like this close to getting it.
Yeah.
And then to an extent, I think you gave up. Or like thought that like, not like unreasonably, but like there was just something that you were trying to find the words for to say that, as far as the what takes the place of that dragon versus child is what's already there and what it's trying to move towards. And it can't be found in either of those things individually.
Yeah.
And the idea of there's no light in the lamp and there's no light in the outlet. So that there's no true self in the dragon.
Right.
And there's no true self in the child. But there is a true self that is the source of both.
Right. It's hard to not go into religious language here, because I think the religious language has done the best job of trying to symbolize this stuff.
Yeah.
And so obviously the Christ story, one thing that's coming to mind is this idea of light and dark. And we tend to think, okay, if they're these separate things, right? If you block the light, then you have darkness. Just pulling your shades down. It's like, oh, look, the room's dark now. Now it's light. But the truth is, even when the shade's open and your room's light, the darkness is still there.
Mm.
The darkness didn't go out the window and the light came in. You now have both. And then it gets, this idea of dark matter, right? But which is analogous, all these things in actual physics keep more and more matching these spiritual ideas. But so the idea that darkness is here, the fundamental ground, of awareness, of non-dual awareness, is this darkness. And the darkness is there. No matter how much light you put in, the darkness is still there also.
Yeah.
And so again, that's this dialectic thing of wait, how can it be both?
Right. One doesn't replace the other.
Right. What is it to have both? Right. What is that?
That third thing.
Yeah. If that's a thing, right? What is that? If it's not two things, but it's one thing.
Yeah.
It's like if you take, two hydrogens and one oxygen molecule, you get this thing called water, right? It's like, well, wait a second. That's very different than just a hydrogen atom and an oxygen atom. There's this element that gets created. So even in physics, there's these things that happen that seem miraculous. Here's how I understand it. The way our minds work, when we orient our mind to a duality, we're using our ego mind. And that the ego mind's, that's just all it's capable of, is seeing the duality.
Right.
It doesn't...
It's the best tool for the job.
Yeah. And when you have something that isn't in the realm of the dual, the ego simply can't see it. It's just how it works. The ego can't see it. But if you encounter it,
so
right?
If the ego only sees the dark side of a duality, it's going to shut off that duality. As one consequence of that.
Right.
And if it only sees the light side of it, it's going to overemphasize the light side of it and focus on that, or typically.
Right.
Obviously there's pathologies that might choose one over the other for whatever reason, but it's going to make a choice because it thinks it has to.
Yeah. Like with what is it? With analog computers, it's 0 and 1s, right? So you have zeros and ones. And so the computer doesn't understand a third thing.
Right.
Right. It's like, yeah, but what about 0 and 1 together? It's like, well, I mean, that just doesn't...
Irrelevant.
Yeah, right. It's like, okay, that's outside of the parameters of how that works. And so that's what happens to us, right? Is when we encounter that, like the idea of a Zen koan and the student meditating on the paradoxical question to which there is no actual rational answer.
Right.
They move more and more towards insanity because it's like a computer self-destructing, right? It's just caught it gets caught in this loop that can't resolve itself. It literally starts to open up a dimension or open up a realm or open up to the conscious.
New landing place.
And then the idea is that it's like the opposite of splitting an atom, right? If you think of splitting an atom, we know what happens when you split an atom in classical physics. You have a nuclear explosion.
Right.
And this just unfathomable power and destructiveness from splitting this thing that is so small that if you ever seen to scale, like how small an atom is, it's just ridiculous. And you split it, and then you get this devastating explosion. And that's like the flip side of bringing a split together. It's like you bring a split together and you get this nuclear explosion, only instead of it being destruction, it's love.
Transformative. Yeah.
It's the opposite of destroy. It's create. Who would know that you sit there, prior to nuclear physics and stuff, if I had said, hey, check out this atom and let's see what happens when we split it apart, you'd be like, yeah, sure, cool, let's see. You would have no idea of you better get far, far away.
Right.
Because this is going to be tremendously powerful if we split this atom. When we bring a split together, this thing happens that you just do not expect. And the idea is that what shows up or what you encounter is consciousness, is light, is essence. And then, of course, there's that idea and then what you realize is, oh, you didn't just create that.
Right.
You just undid the splitting. It's like when you open your blind and you go, oh my God, it's not dark outside. It's actually light outside.
Right.
You didn't just create light in your room. The light was already out there. You just finally let the light into that room. Right. So the truth is light. The truth is love. You just have a bunch of blinds closed in your psyche. And when you let a split come together and the light comes on, it becomes illuminated in your mind. But there's also a recognition that the very light that's illuminating your mind isn't because your ego just became awesome. It's because you let the light that's beyond shine in. And then, of course, there's also the recognition of, oh, and that light that's beyond is actually you. Right? It gets all weird and paradoxical.
Right. You don't want to rush to that.
No, you don't want to rush to that. But Jesus having that, awareness and then saying that, I'm God. Like, well, what does that mean? And of course, it doesn't mean my ego is God.
Right.
It means God is shining through me. And I'm simply a conduit. I'm simply a servant, which again is just this affront to the arrogance of the modern day ego identity. But so my understanding of the split, the fall, the eating the apple, et cetera, we did this thing where we separated out and the light went out. And then there's this darkness, there's this suffering. And turning the light back on requires a surrender, a death. The thing you were trying to go do on your own without the light isn't going to happen. So it goes back to this very sort of religious idea of that again, our society is like really opposed to these days.
Yeah.
It's like we rebelled against the church, which I think was good, and against oppressive religious
right
persecution and dogma, but it's analogous to the individual lifespan where the adolescent rebels against the parents and decides they're going to do it all on their own, but there's really just a larger order that they need to go surrender to now, and
not that on your own.
Yeah, right.
I just keep thinking about wherever two or more shall gather, like the concept, there am I also, or that there's an aspect to, there's different layers of meaning to that, but there's like the benefit of a religious order, the benefit of a spiritual community is that you're not solely reliant on your personal traps or your personal experiences, that having it both reflected in others and also contrasted with others is an important insight as you try to do that work, or to find that, to open those shades, to see that light. And when the rebellion you're talking about is when anyone tries to tell you they control the shades in your life, like that's just impossible and ultimately not helpful. I had a koan moment as you were talking about it, as far as the idea that because the light's turned on, the darkness hasn't gone away. Just as far as like the potential energy or potential darkness, or that it's a new context for the same moment, but the potential for both are still there. So the light's on, but it's not replacing something else. Yeah.
If we just do a thing real quick, and I don't know how this will translate via audio.
We never do, but
So I'm in a certain state right now, and when you are engaging me and making eye contact with me, you can tell I'm not in what would be considered a kind of a normal state. Does that seem accurate? So if we say I'm orienting from conscious mind, I just have to say it to some small degree.
Doing the best you can.
What's that?
I said doing the best you can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just ask you first. So when I say that, are you just being agreeable? Are you just under Lance's cultish mind control?
There's no effort to control on your part. There's a lack of presupposition. Like if I try to meet you there, I then notice the assumptions I'm making. So like if I meet you there, it's pretty much, I can then see more parts of myself that I wasn't aware of prior to trying to meet you there. Yeah. And so it's pretty, is it nonplussed? What's the word? It's not, I could feel in myself, like if I don't meet you there, if I just see you there without trying to meet you there, I could feel myself maybe trying to prove something or trying to chase something. But if I actually dial into it, it's not, it's very accepting of what is. But then it brings to my awareness the things that I'm not accepting as they are. Right.
Right.
But
yeah. And so in alignment with that, there's this idea of truth, right? Like this kind of dynamic that's happening between us, even just on a mundane level. If you're trying to bullshit me and I know the truth, then the person that knows the truth is going to go into this kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, go ahead. Let's hear, But like if I already saw what happened, or I already...
Right.
It's just like...
You've seen the end of the movie.
Yeah, right. And it's a bad feeling, right? When you're trying to bullshit someone and it's like, oh, fuck, they already know. Like you said, you just know that all I can do here is just dig my grave deeper.
Right.
Because they already know.
But you're not trying to prove it. So that's the kind of neutrality of it, I think I sense.
Okay, yeah.
Like you may know the truth, but it doesn't need to be proven. There's no there's no over and against there.
Yeah, right. And, to get more weird and culty and religious sounding, can you tell there's that idea that like you're already forgiven?
Yeah. I think that's the presupposition part. I think I felt like there's an awareness outside of time.
Yeah.
So forgiveness is often tied to time and when things happened and what was appropriate. And the acceptance, I'd call it acceptance, that forgiveness isn't even necessary with acceptance.
And then there's that strange thing where simultaneously this guy Lance is here that has an ego that's just chock full of presuppositions.
Right. But we weren't, now he's coming out, but we weren't talking to him a second ago.
Right. So I guess the thing I was going to do is, okay, so
there's a depersonalization.
Yes.
Both of you and of other.
Yes.
And that's, I think is relatable and experiential, that if you as like stepping out of the character both of yourself and of other is part of that experience. Yeah,
no doubt. Yeah, and just to get technical, the word depersonalization.
That's good. It's not how Jeff just used it.
Right. He just used it wrong.
Jeff is not a trained psychotherapist.
That's right. And I resent being accused of depersonalizing. Now, just that term typically means, and I know you already know this, but just to explain to the listener, the depersonalization is typically used in psychology to mean a defensive dissociation from one's personal self. Whereas, interestingly, right, it's like, well, wait a minute, is this depersonalization or is it conscious?
Right. Call it unpersonalized.
Yeah. Non-personal is a word that gets used a lot in consciousness studies, right?
And it's why you said, despite all that and Lance is here with his ego and his opinions and his experience, because it's almost like checking back in and be like, no, I'm still, I haven't dissociated. There's
right. And it's not Lance that's sitting here with no presuppositions.
Right.
But so that it's kind of like the nuclear thing I was talking about. It's like, okay, but now this quote unquote non-personal thing that's showing up and engaging you, it's somehow deeply personal in some other kind of person way, right? Because I'm not just, zombie eyes, right? There's some kind of presence, some kind of self. It's more of a capital S self, right? Because you as a person, tell me if I'm wrong, feel seen.
For sure.
So it's that strange thing of, we fear losing person, losing self, losing life. And I'm suggesting, again, to some small degree, that happened to me, and then I died, and then I woke up as this. It's interesting. It brings this deep grief that is it's like a poignant.
Yeah, it's something shifted, and
I don't usually say it that way for obvious reasons to people. I say I went through a certain kind of ego death experience, but I don't walk around being this. Let me rephrase that. I'm always being this, but I don't present it to people. Just kind of full time.
Yeah, that's the the grieving part. I think initially I thought the grief was the thinking about the death experience, but the grief is the living two lives.
And to sit here and be in touch with both, it's then it heals my split more and more between Lance and this. And this is a different topic where it's this idea of, okay, I died and woke up as this, but now I'm in the process of trying to embody this, because I can go into this state and be disembodied. But how much can this come down into Lance without Lance getting too freaked out? Right. Without Lance's darkness putting up too big of a fight and having too much turmoil.
How much of Lance's darkness can he let be accepted by it?
Yeah. So on the flip side, if I shut this off and this idea of the darkness and the light being together, that's what my idea about the experiential was what if I sort of show you an experience of both, meaning having the light turned on in me or the light turned off. And
it's just impending tragedy is what
yeah. And again, I don't know. I'm trying to think if it's even appropriate to do it on the podcast. It's like I have this impetus to like turn the recorder off. I don't know if obviously we don't have to publish it. So it's not going to just look like tragedy. It's going to look like evil when I do it. And I've done this with lots of clients. It's not that big a deal. And actors do it. Like I've said, you look at Anthony Hopkins, you look at Robert De Niro, you look at, some of those guys that are really good at shifting into that black, darkness mode. So again, the idea of right now I'm saying that the light is on. And so we're talking about that, right? So I'm just gonna close the blind and then engage you from there.
Yeah. There's part of me that like throughout all of this is like hearing it from the listener's perspective.
Right.
I was like, that's like constantly running and like this all sounds like a preamble to something you don't really want to do. So it's fun.
Yeah. And I'm trying to listen to that and figure out why is that. All right. So something shifted and now it feels all right. I don't know what shifted, but actually, let me just ask you, can you tell that it's different now? I'm not doing this darkness thing, but
yeah, there is it just felt like something you didn't want to leave to come to this in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And now I've left it.
Yeah. There's something that you were able to give up trying to hold on to something else.
Yeah. And that's how it works, right? It's like again, I hesitate to use this word, mostly not because I don't like using it, but because I think people have judgments. But it's like if that was some experience of Christ consciousness, it's like, all right, now Christ just left.
You've turned the radio station.
And again, as soon as I say that, I feel grief. Now, because now I'm more just back being this Lance fuck.
Well, I mean, that's the threat you're trying to help people avoid is that life without consciousness.
Right. All right. So now if I just close the door more, again, in simplified terms, it's like now if I close the door to quote unquote Lance, meaning Lance's ego, right? And just show unconsciousness. And again, what I'm saying is unconsciousness is what it is.
That was almost more comfortable.
For you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure.
An interesting shift.
Yeah. Well, say more.
Well, it's just none of this is personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I don't think there was a attention to, so you went from consciousness, from conscious mind, and the resistance to shut that off, to play the part of you,
yeah,
for a moment, and that could feel the tension of that, because there's a sense in which you weren't sure which direction to go. It's like, how does Lance exist in this moment, right? And like it's a big shift, and then to cut off the thing that you know gives life and light, right?
Yeah,
has meant a lot to this supposed separate Lance self, right? And like this boundary that can't maintain between light and dark.
Yeah.
And then to shift to dark is a relief, because on some level that the darkness isn't everything. So that you can go down and occupy darkness more easily than you can yourself.
Yeah, right.
Because darkness doesn't have to be anything other than what it is. But Lance has a lot of ideas about what Lance should be. And so the relief of just going to darkness, and part of that is just you and I have done a lot of work on me about dealing with darkness. So like I also just kind of like it, because then it's like home base.
Yeah.
So
it's like getting in the shade.
Yeah.
Right. Getting in out of the heat.
Yeah. And then like usually you'll find something fun and scary, and like it's like an adventure.
Right.
The adventure of like being myself every day is one I have to it's hard. But just sinking into the depths is quite a journey you just take yourself on.
So if we go to where I'll block out Lance,
yeah,
and just show the dark, does that feel all right?
Mm.
All right. Right.
It got really I got really nervous at first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you feel how what I'm noticing.
Trying to like meet you there more.
Okay. So what happened is space opened up, and I was initially not doing space, because you feel how now that there's conscious space again, which makes it not threatening. So just notice that, okay, now what I'm suggesting right now is it's the lights off, but there's space, which again, I'm saying is non-dual awareness. But you can see that whole personal forgiving thing isn't there. It's absent, right? So from here, you're just an object. Yeah. And again, just like, okay, this idea of Christ or the devil, if Christ was showing up in that other state, if from here the devil starts showing up, right? We just notice when I do that. So you can see that's something different.
Yeah.
So it's not just dead eyes. There's actually a destructiveness. And I'm just saying that's a force that's in the psyche. And again, it's analogous to like in the earth, if you go down deep enough, there's lava. And when I go like this, you can tell I'm showing you lava. And you can tell that's a vibration that's not a normal vibration that we sort of include in our societal norms.
It's the kind of thing that ends up on the internet.
Yeah. But what I work with a lot is people in conflict against what I was just showing you, trying to repress it, trying to deny it, projecting it, etc., versus owning it. And the awakening experience I went through, and this is typical of people who go through awakening experiences, where that was once taboo in my psyche, it no longer is. It doesn't mean I'm all for it and want to go burn everything down. But it means, okay, I see that now, and I see that, I see that is in everyone, and that's just part of the, it's like if you didn't know that there was blood inside of us, and then, oh my God, you cut yourself and you saw that, you seem to have all this red stuff coursing through you. It's like, that's actually how it's supposed to be. That's how it is in everyone. You don't need to try to hide that or get rid of that.
Right.
It's actually what one of the things you run off of. But it's like that destructiveness you could see. It was hate, right? It wasn't love. It was the opposite. It was hate. Does that?
Yeah, it was like trying to drill through something.
Yeah.
It was like, very destructive.
Right. So this idea of being able to hold both love and hate, because the idea is that love that I was bringing in, or that Christ consciousness, or that larger self, or whatever word you want to use, again, this idea of the dialectic, I couldn't arrive at that until I could also hold its opposite.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.